We're going live.
We are live.
This is the first time that we're trying to do something like this with the Google Hangout. So if anything embarrassing pops up on screen, just pretend you didn't see it. Okay, so thanks everyone for coming. My name is Jahan Chu, as I know most of you in the crowd. I'm the founder of the Ethereum Meetup Group, which is what we're doing today. This is my comrade in arms, compatriot, co-founding member of the Bitcoin Association of Hong Kong, and software engineer, ex-software engineer, or still?
Well, yeah.
Ex-software engineer, ex-investment banker, now law student,
That's right.
working towards his degree in when?
I graduated in April.
Oh, he graduates in April, great. At HKU, yeah? CityU. And he's going to be giving us a great presentation, what I'm really highly anticipating, on smart contracts and decentralized autonomous organizations. So I'm not going to talk too much because I think most everyone here is pretty crypto knowledgeable, but in kind of 5 seconds or less, Bitcoin technology is essentially, a revolutionary type of technology protocol, really, which, whose kind of primary application is currency and kind of financial transactions. But the really exciting part of it, I think, is the potential for Bitcoin technology to be spread out into a whole generation, really a paradigm shift in how we look at transfer of value, transfer of information, communication rails, which can apply to everything from the legal system that we're thinking about now, to accounting systems, to transfer of digital assets, and beyond. We haven't even really scratched the surface of what's possible. And so that's why this talk today is really interesting. We won't be going so much into applications of Bitcoin in terms of like kind of currency and finance, because that's not what tonight is about. Tonight is much more about what we call crypto 2.0. Which are non-currency, specifically non-financial applications of kind of crypto technology. So Ethereum is one of these crypto 2.0 technologies, whereas Bitcoin's kind of primary application is about currency. It's about kind of transferring, value from A to B. Ethereum takes a much more generalized approach, which essentially is attempting to try and create an environment, a kind of application environment where you can build whatever application you want. It could be an accounting application. It could be a contract application. It could be an application which measures the temperature and sets futures contracts and bets based on that. It could be any type of application which you can code and upload into the Ethereum blockchain. So that's what Ethereum is, but tonight is more kind of non-denominational. We're not really going to be talking so much about Ethereum, and that's not what tonight's about. It's really about to look at, from the legal perspective, what's possible in the space of kind of crypto 2.0. There's always a lot of talk from kind of enthusiasts like me, and possibly you as well, about, wow, Bitcoin can do so much and crypto can do so much, but there's a lot less specifics. There's a lot less detail. And I think we kind of need to do the hard work of just delving into it. And that's why we've asked for Samuel's kind of domain expertise in the legal side, because I don't know anything about legal profession. I just guess at it. But he's put together a great presentation starting off about looking at traditional contracts, how that may translate into smart contracts, and then looking at the overall environment, potentials, pitfalls for kind of smart contracts, as well as DAOs, which are the application of decentralized autonomous organizations. What happens if we start to leave the kind of legal jurisdiction and start to enter the cloud jurisdiction? How does that impact corporations? So without further ado, I'm going to switch over to Samuel. I'm going to share screens here so that we can get him on, and he can start off with his presentation. So Samuel, take it away.
Okay, all right. I'm just going to stand. I prefer talking on this stand.
Okay.
Thank you for having me here. Thank you for showing up. I know it's Occupy is going on, and that kept some people busy. In fact, we expected a few more people. But yeah, thank you for the introduction, Jahan. My view on things is just a little bit different than what Jahan said, and I'll explain it. So first of all, I got to make a disclaimer. This is not legal advice. This is just the usual stuff. I'm not a lawyer. One thing.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the language used herein is usually intended to be the legal definition. When it's not, I'll explicitly say it. And that's very important because you can get completely the wrong idea if you, depending on the definition that you use. I'll be focusing on legal issues mostly, but I'll also include some applications of where I see smart contracts are going. And I'll mostly ignore issues of technology. Like I don't want to talk about the issues of mining and things like that. I'm not talking about that. And I try really hard. I'll try to avoid political type of arguments. But when something is so profound as this, politics is actually quite tied into it. So it's more or less inevitable. But I'll try to state that it's my opinion and so on. Okay, so that's the table of content. I'll start by just giving a brief introduction about law and contract. Okay, so.
Is there anything else you want to say about yourself? I mean, I didn't really do a kind of a comprehensive, but you know, we briefly mentioned that you're software engineering. What were you doing? Just so people have a sense of where you're coming from.
Yeah, I was a software engineer since I was very young. Actually, since I was 8 years old, I was working as a programmer. But I always had an interest in law for at least a dozen years or so. I did some work for an investment bank that we all know and love. And I was doing some compliance-related work for them. So I had one foot in the legal world, one way or another, since around 2008.
Cool.
And I'm now a law student, and I'll be graduating soon. So, okay, yeah, the point of this talk is to actually bridge the gap between technology and law. Now, that's actually quite a very wide gap. Lawyers generally don't know much about technology. Just look at any courtroom. Just look at, some people might describe this as looking antiquated. And the most notable piece of clothing that they have, any metaphor that you come up with is not very appealing. Or, let's see, but where was I going? Yeah, so, and most technology people, technology has been able to work inside a bubble, specifically since the internet came up. Most regulations didn't apply to the internet. You could basically do whatever you wanted. And so technologists that have grown up, or at least for the last 20 years or so, being able to ignore laws in general. Business people, they have to know what regulations are in their own specific business. Computer programmers, not so much. So we've had this legal system that has stayed unchanged for a very long time, and technologists who've been ignoring law. So that's why this gap is so wide. So I'll attempt to kind of bridge that gap. And it's mostly, I'm presuming most people here actually know what Bitcoin is. Okay, yeah. When it comes to Bitcoin, I actually did write a paper on this already, and I'm kind of assuming that most people already know what it is. But yeah, like I said, out of all the industries, the legal industries, hasn't changed very much. And most other things, like most other businesses, most other industries, there's an ecosystem. It's semi-Darwinian. There's some competition and so on. Not so much in the legal world as some people call it a monopoly and so on. There's one exception, which is regulatory arbitrage, which is a fascinating topic, but not one that we have time for. Okay, so just very quickly, like I said, I'll do a brief overview of law. So there's contract law, tort law, criminal law, administrative law. The formatting is a little bit off. Smart contracts obviously have to do with the law of contracts. However, you can't run away from the other types of law. And the reason I bring this up is that there's some people, even some people who are public facing inside some of these smart contract development projects, which do say things like, oh, we'll be able to opt out of the court system and so on. That's not exactly correct, or at least if it is, it's very difficult. So yeah, I'll be focusing mostly on contracts, and these are just the general basic ones. There's corporate law, which is mostly contract, things like that. But I'm not going to focus on that very much. Okay, contracts 101. Most people think they know what a contract is. A contract is not the piece of paper. It's actually the agreement between the parties. And it's not defined by the piece of paper. It's not defined by the writing or the signature. It's defined by the conduct of the parties. So that's what happens. If you show up to the judge with a contract, he'll ask you to tell the story of the contract. How did it start? So he needs to be able to identify who offered what was the acceptance, what was the consideration, which is the quid pro quo, and what was their intention. Now, when it comes to, if you want to write an automated contract, how would you do it? Well, you need to be able to track how it was formed, so basically the history of the contract, and what the rights represent, what the obligations represent. That's what you really need to track. If we want to build a software system that handles contracts, that's what it would be handling. We can't, there's no point in trying to tell the software the history of how it came about, like you would with a judge. Okay, so that's it about law. You can feel free to interrupt me at any time before we move forward also, by the way.
You have 4 steps here about what constitutes a contract.
Yeah.
Me being a complete layman in terms of contracts, I try to enter in as few of them as possible. Can you just walk us through the particular steps?
Okay, well, the offer is like it sounds mostly. This is one whole course in law school that every student has to go through.
Can you do it in 10 seconds or less? That would help us out.
Is there a simple example?
A simple example. Okay, so I walk to Mr. Bing, and I just let's assume he doesn't speak English. I don't speak Cantonese. So let's say the menu is here, and I just point at the menu. That's actually the offer. That sounds like something else, and because he's advertising what the menu is there and the price. That's called a consideration. The consideration is the idea that one thing goes one way, one thing goes the other. That's what consideration means. And the acceptance is when he nods and says, yes, I'll do it. And then he goes to the kitchen, prepares it. And the intention is really just one of those nebulous concepts, right? You just have to assume, okay, well, that's what these two parties intended to do. That's what he's doing. But okay, I'll just complete this example first. So you see, like that was completely, it wasn't even a verbal contract. So people talk about verbal contracts and so on. This was completely by conduct. I didn't say anything, he didn't say anything, it was just pointing and nodding. If I try to run away without paying, he'd say, hey, what are you doing? You've got a contract here. And he'd be right. Even though there was no paper, and I could argue, no, there's no paper, there's no signature, there's no contract. The judge would disagree.
Is this the order? It's offer, acceptance, consideration, intention, or is it offer, consideration, acceptance?
It's not a chronological order.
Oh.
Well, offer comes before acceptance, obviously, but the last two is just kind of nebulous concepts that a human would interpret. Like intention, for example, is for certain contracts, someone that doesn't have capacity, legal capacity, like a minor or something, cannot form the intention. That's why it's like that. Each one of those is actually would take a long time to describe.
And how about the other side of the slide, formation, rights, obligations, and performance?
Yeah, so every contract gives you a right and an obligation. And that's the consideration, right? So the Mr. Bing employee, well, I guess Mr. Bing, because I'm actually contracting with the restaurant, not the employee. Mr. Bing now has earned the right to get whatever, $100 or whatever it is. And he also has the obligation to give me the crate or whatever that.
Bing.
Yeah, the Bing. And the reverse is true, right? So there's always rights and obligations going both ways. And the performance is the history of all the things that happen. For example, when I pay, there needs to be a record of who performed what and at what time.
So that's a contract.
So yeah, so I just talked through an example of a contract.
Great.
Okay, so let's get into smart contracts finally. Okay, so first of all, an overview. The first two bullet points are the Wikipedia definition. There is no authoritative definition yet. It's a concept that's pretty new. I say that it's pretty new. However, there's one thing I want to say about this is that smart contracts, as opposed to many other technologies, is not based on brand new technology. It's technology that could have existed before. There's actually nothing really groundbreaking about it. The only thing is that without cryptocurrency, it was more or less of a moot thing to do. There wasn't really any point.
Why?
Because banks don't cooperate. If you're going to make, okay, here's the thing, a Bitcoin, what Bitcoin is good for is a transfer. It's only a one-way transfer, right? You transfer a store of value or a unit of account. That's all it does. However, any contract is more than just a one-way transfer. There's performance coming the other way, or there's obligations, there's rights, there's something else. So that's what this is, and that's why this is the evolution. This is one quantum leap above cryptocurrencies. So,
well, I mean, what is a smart contract in a nutshell? I'm still trying to wrap my head around. You know, you've told me what a paper contract, well, a contract, even not on paper. But so, what's the big deal about a smart contract then?
Okay, see, that's kind of the same thing I was saying. Is that a Bitcoin is only good for a transfer of value, but the overall transaction is a lot more deep than that. You know, you need the other guy to perform as well. If you just send someone some Bitcoin, there's no guarantee that he'll actually perform his end of the bargain, right? So that's what a smart contract is. It's actually to identify all of the obligations and the rights and lump them into one piece of code. Now, code, computers are used to code. They're used to reading a set of instructions. And you could also kind of describe that. You could describe any software as a contract between the programmer and the CPU. And so it just follows a list of instructions, and that's what a smart contract is meant to be. But but the last one is the most important one. But it's a new type of application development platform for complex transactions. That's my definition of it. That's the short form. So you can't say that it's anything very concrete. It's kind of like saying, what is C++? And you say, oh well, it's Windows, it's Linux. It's Windows and Linux was enabled. You could write Windows and Linux in C++, but C++ in itself has limitless possibilities. Same with this. You can create whatever contracts you want. Okay, so first I want to talk about the reason why. Oh, oops. When I was saying that the smart contracts is not necessarily anything new, I want to talk about the way that smart contracts, what I call smart contracts light, used to be. So we talked about this before in previous meetups. It's like, oh, a vending machine is a smart contract. Well, yes, but there's some distinctions between what we used to call smart contracts there and what smart contracts now have the potential to be. So what happens here, so let's say an online vendor, so Amazon.com, let's say, you go there and you make a purchase. So what is the contract? The way that it really works is that there's an adhesion contract, there's terms of use. An adhesion contract, for those who don't know, is a take it or leave it contract. Whereas, if I want to buy your phone, we can negotiate the price. That's not an adhesion. An adhesion contract is when you don't get any say in what the terms are going to be. So that's what happens here. The terms of use determines the conditions and so on. The difference here with what a smart contract would be is that here you can see that Amazon.com is the one performing all the executions. It's performing all the executions and it determines the terms. You don't really get much say in it other than the fact that you just you either click to buy or you don't. You can go somewhere else. But smart contracts allow a little bit more fine-grained detail, tuning, I mean. And a futures exchange is another example where there's Arthur in the back here who has his own futures exchange. That's also interesting because the full contract is actually more than just a futures exchange. A future, for those who don't know, is just it's a right to buy something in the future or a forward, which is more or less the same thing. A futures exchange is trading these contracts. Now you're trading these contracts But the full contract that includes all of the terms and all the conditions is not actually, is only partially executed inside the exchange. The full contract has actually more terms. Like if you go to court and dispute that particular contract, there would be all these implied terms that would come from elsewhere that would not be inside BitMEX, for example.
Where would they be?
They're kind of nebulous. They're either implied. Okay, it's either from the terms of use, or the actual terms of the actual future itself that you'd have to pull from the database, and also implied from the statutes.
So what you're saying is that in an existing contract, even one of these kind of smart contract 1.0 type of things, right? There's the actual contract itself, but then there's all these other documents which could also be implied as part of the contract itself. They're just kind of referred to.
That's right.
Okay.
And the execution that's encoded inside the system is only one part of the contract. It's not the whole contract.
Got it.
Because some other things need to be performed outside of the system.
So there's stuff that's not in the code.
That's right.
Got it.
So here's just an example of a light contract. That's probably pretty small. You might have trouble reading that. But I'm just spelling out the term, the procedure for a vending machine. And
this is a Bitcoin vending machine or just any vending machine?
Just a general generic vending machine. So I've already gone through the example of Mr. Bing, so there's not sure there's much point. But so you insert coins, and then you select Coke or Pepsi, and then something comes out, you get your change. Everybody's done that before. But this is an example of what the code would look like, and that's even smaller than the last one. But basically, this is the kind of code that you could write in this kind of example.
Do you want to talk about it really quick, just in bullet points? I mean, for the people that can't see it.
Well, basically, you'd be able to encode all this. See, right now, this code is already inside the machine. So I'm just kind of showing an example of the way it used to be. But the thing is here I've written it in Ruby, which is a standard language. And you never know that the exact same code could be sitting inside the machine. Now, the thing is, the code is inside the machine. So that's a smart contract light. So what we're trying to do is pull the contract out in an independent space. So I think I don't want to spend too much time talking about the detail. Okay, so this is the important part. So a smart contract does not equal a contract in law. So a contract has a strict definition. I talked about that. But smart contracts is actually, it's a development platform. So you can write practically anything. You can write things that doesn't have the quid pro quo, the consideration. Therefore, it's not a contract. And I'll actually show some examples of that. The smart contract is more similar, in legal terms, it's more similar to an indenture. And the system is an automated servant or executor. Not an executor is someone who executes the will. But this is the previous legal meaning, the older legal meaning.
So what is an indenture?
An indenture, you've heard indentured servants?
Yes.
Okay, that was, there was, basically, an indenture is not all that similar to a job description. Like okay. when you sign an employment contract, this is what your obligations are. Indenture is literally a list of obligations or a list of instructions.
So it sounds like it's just like an executable of this code.
That's what smart contract bridges. It bridges an executable software system, brings that into the real world where we can actually execute a full spectrum of business operations.
So it's like code for business.
Yeah, you could say it that way. Okay, so why are we talking about smart contracts? Why are they important? Okay, so the first thing is consistency. If we draft a contract in computer code has evolved over the last 50 years or so to get rid of ambiguity. Any ambiguity the CPU wasn't able to handle. It just spit it out. So therefore, it'd be very consistent. There would be no room for ambiguity, or very little anyway. The minimum amount possible. The next one is clarity. And this is what I was talking about when I was talking about the the distinction between a smart contract like, or I was referring to the futures exchange or Amazon. The contract itself, the smart contract itself, represents the actual agreement, and it also is the code that will be executed. So it's actually, they're both lumped together. There's no disconnect between, so in the Amazon scenario, the code that is executed within the system is not the same thing as the terms of use. Those are two separate documents. If someone makes an update in the terms of use, there's no guarantee that the system will execute exactly faithfully to the intent that's in the terms of use. So that's what I'm saying by there's no disconnect. Pre-verified, just like any other code, you can run the compiler. The compiler will tell you if there's a syntax error and so on. Just like any other software program, you can insert some very terrible logical errors, and that's inevitable. Predictable, just like software code, you can simulate and you can test, which is completely impossible in the real world with dumb contracts, for example, unless you'd create a software program that emulates. But here it'd be pretty much directly feasible. Efficiency, well, yeah, it could be automated, so of course it'd be fast, just like any other software system. Privacy, it can be encrypted as needed. I'll go into more detail. Storage, that doesn't always apply, so I'll just skip that for now. Cost efficiency, anybody who's ever been to court, everybody who's ever been to arbitration knows that it's an expensive proposition.
Talking about time or money or both?
Both. Yeah, both.
Sorry, it's a loaded question.
Okay, and independence. Again, this is what is new about smart contracts. It didn't exist before.
Can you repeat that cost efficient part? Okay, so what you're saying, there's no need for cost and arbitration at all?
I'm not saying there's no need for them. Okay, the comparison I just drew, it's cheaper than courts anywhere, is not a fair comparison, because a smart contract is just doing, it's more or less the same thing as paying someone else to be your servant and executing a set of instructions. So I mean, maybe you could pay a minimum wage or something, and you might probably be happy with that. But, so that's really the cost difference here. But the thing is here, cost efficiency. I guess that's not necessarily guaranteed because it depends on the technology you use. But I'll get into more detail later. But did I address your question?
Kind of, yeah, maybe we can talk about this later.
Okay, I think there's two issues in what you say. One of them is the pricing, and the other one is actually whether you need to get into alternative dispute resolution, which I'll handle later as well. Oh, actually, I didn't finish. I didn't finish the last one. Yeah, so existing systems are interpreted and executed by the service provider. I can't remember why I said conflict of interest. Oh, right. Okay. In the Amazon scenario, Amazon might have a conflict of interest to kind of bend the rules in their favor because they're the ones executing the contract. When you buy something, they're the ones doing it, right? But here, we're taking the contract and we're taking it out of their system, and it lives on a third trusted system. So a third-party trusted system is the one that we holding on to the contract and actually performing it.
But isn't the kind of legal jurisdiction or whatever kind of court system I'm executing or signing the contract in, isn't that the analogy of the kind of third party?
Okay, what happens when you say, I want HKSER governing law? All that's doing is that it's pulling in these implied terms. Like, you're probably not going to go to court. So if I'm writing, so here, if I'm writing a set of instructions, I don't need to, I need to go back to your question though, but you're...
Well, yeah, I guess the question I have is, I as a layman have always had this idea that a contract, the power of a contract is actually stored in the jurisdiction or the power that, whatever legal or government that it's been kind of written in or signed in. Like, that's always been my impression of, like, where does the strength of the contract lie? It's based on its ability to be enforced. Is that not actually true? Okay, yeah. There's a difference between physical storage of the actual paper and which. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like an enforcement of the terms and the spirit or whatever.
Okay. Yeah. Well, between the two of us, so long as we let's say we have a contract, and we both perform admirably, and everything is fine, and there's no problem. We just go our merry way.
Yeah.
It's only when we have a dispute, then we have to take it. There's the escalating levels, which I cover later. I think I need to. I'll save that for later. So I'd be jumping ahead.
Okay.
But the main point, which I'm not sure is understood here, is that we're taking the contract, and we're actually the contract and the execution is in the custody of a third party.
And
So
in this case, that third party is whom?
well, it's either Codius or Ethereum.
Okay, so it's a Bitcoin-ish technology.
That's right.
Got it. Okay.
And in fact, Bitcoin could be that as well, because
Sure.
Bitcoin does have a scripting language that you can do. It is limited, though. Okay, so let's look at the drawbacks. Well, first of all, it's cryptic. Not everybody can read computer language, at least not yet.
But that's arguable that existing contracts are human readable too.
That's a good point.
If anyone's ever tried to read one, I mean, it's actually quite hard.
Yeah, and it is sophisticated. That's the other thing. It's not just the specific syntax of it. It's sometimes you have that problem. Any software developer knows this. The boss is just saying like, I just needed to it just needs to light up. I just want a light to turn on. And then, as a software engineer, you're trying to tell them it's like, yes, but that's 1,000 lines of code just to get it to do it right. You need to have good attention to detail to do things that would be simple in the human everyday world. So there's a big disconnect, and having a good understanding of how to code something to the level of detail that a computer will not find ambiguous requires a sophisticated level of thinking. And like I was just saying, that becomes tedious. It could be tedious. The next point is the technology infrastructure. Okay, I wrote AG here, government records are generally not digitized. Okay, so for example, let's say we wanted to transfer a house. Okay, well, in Hong Kong, title deeds are not digital. They're only on paper. So therefore, this wouldn't be possible. And I actually want to tie this, I want to jump over here. There's reluctance and resisting from the existing system, or there will be or should be, because you would require a change of law. Literally, like LegCo would actually have to draft a new piece of legislation or amend a piece of legislation to allow this kind of thing to happen. So it's going to be a while until you can do real estate transactions in Hong Kong. However, that said, in Florida, for example, they have electronic-only mortgages, and that's starting to spread around. So I'm just going to cover the last point. It's tightly coupled to other technologies. Okay, so let's say you want to write a smart contract that, a stock option, and at the end of the day, you're going to exercise the option whether the price of the stock is above or below a certain level. Well, obviously, you want to get the quote. You want to get it from the authoritative source, so the HKSC, for example. Now, the HKSC, they might change their API suddenly, and then if they do that, then you'd have to rewrite the smart contract, which may or may not be easy to do. So that's the thing. That's a general thing about software. It's not new to smart contracts, but it is there, and it's going to be a challenge. It's forever going to be a challenge. When you have external dependencies, what can go wrong will go wrong. That's what Murphy's Law means. Okay, so just going to go briefly. So when I was saying, what is a contract? We have these rights and obligations. So you can write conditional instructions that will hinge on third-party information. I just gave the example. Actually, I shouldn't have done this. But you can just keep in mind the example that I just gave about the stock option. So within the contract, you would just draft, instead of just one of the two parties determining what the price of Apple is, you literally go and check the NYSE. Or it could check some other external information like the wallet balance. Ideally, it would be able to check real bank accounts, but the banks generally don't cooperate with that kind of thing. And alternatively, if it's something that's not available, if a contract has it hinges on a condition that is that hinges on information that's not available online, you could have a trusted party. You know, like let's say the two of us have a contract. You know, we trust anybody here to do it, then we can assign that person to go and actually check and then insert that into the contract and say yes, this is what the price was, and then the contract continues according to that condition. Okay, so performance. That's the other side of what I was just saying. Conditions hinge upon some information coming in. Performance is on the way out. So anything that can be accomplished online could be accomplished by a smart contract. Again, hinging upon the fact that the API must stay the same. So a smart contract could make a payment in Bitcoin, could give privileges within a system, send email, publish data, and so on.
So like give privileges within the system. I mean, one of the classic examples of a smart contract is, you know, the electronic door lock, right? And if someone doesn't pay their rent in Bitcoin, for example, and the contract, which is on the blockchain, doesn't verify that the Bitcoin rent has been paid on a certain date, then it disables the lock electronically, which is easy to do and, you know, pretty much can already exist, you know, without any kind of, you know, special technology. So that's the kind of, it's not just privileges within a digital system. Actually, we start to have contracts which can have real world physical kind of consequences. And that starts to go into kind of Internet of Things and, you know, all this like smart property, which is kind of related.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think that's my next line actually. But yeah, you're right. That's the thing. And if you need some performance of something that cannot be done in the virtual world, while you assign a third party to do it, or you trust the other person to do it, you just do it. But at least they would get notified that something is due. Okay, privacy. Yeah, of course, since last year, and everybody in Hong Kong knows who Edward Snowden is, privacy is now a very big concern to consumers. Even all the websites out there are going with HTTPS, and they're being quite serious about it. So smart contracts, it's digital information, so you can encrypt it, you can do whatever you want with it, you can hash it. So it's even easier than with dumb contracts. Dumb contracts, you just have to lock them up, lock them away, and then again, you know, you don't know what the other party is doing with his copy of the contract. But in this case, there's only one. There should be only one version of it floating around, and you can encrypt it.
Can you just explain why there's only one version of it floating around? Where does a smart contract live?
Well, okay, it depends on the technology that you use.
Pick one, whichever one you like.
Okay, in Ethereum, it's actually it would be my understanding of it. And I'm not the authoritative source for Ethereum. It's on the blockchain, so technically everybody has it. But if it's encrypted, only the parties with the right set of keys can view it.
How about for Codius?
For Codius, you have to. For Codius, I guess you could store it yourself, or if the company or the person who manages the smart oracle could also have a database, so you could store it for you. But there only needs to be one, is what I'm saying. Whereas a paper contract generally you have two. Each party gets a copy. Okay. And of course, the executor needs to read it also. So that's one of those things. Okay, so signatures. Those of you who are familiar with the PKI know what this is.
What's the PKI?
The public key infrastructure. That's another university course in itself. I don't want to get into too much detail.
Okay.
But there's a private key and a public key, and together you can identify anybody using sophisticated ways. You can also make sure that something came from a different person, from a specific person, and so on. So given that, you can actually have unidirectional or bidirectionally available, verifiable identities. Like for example, I could sign there, and nobody could tell that it's my signature. But however, if I show up and I say, hey, that was me, and then it's like, okay, yeah, that checks, that is you. So that's unidirectional is what I mean. So that's one way to take privacy even one level higher. And bidirectional, you can just put your name, you just do whatever you want. Okay, the other thing, And this is the building blocks toward the Internet of Things, is that the smart contract itself is actually a web service. So it performs all the things that you see there. You can see there. So basically, like any other website, you could build a tool that would actually go and query it. You know, what status are you in? Did the other party make the deposit yet? And so on. So you could actually ask the smart contract questions. And you can review it, you can amend it, you know, so long as the two parties agree to the amendment, they can, you know, you can terminate it and so on. It doesn't just sit there idle. It's not written in stone.
But how are all these things done in I guess a dumb contract? Like which of these cannot be done in a dumb contract in some form or another?
Okay, well, for example, we write up a contract, and if I want to know whether you made the deposit, let's say the contract asks for you to make a deposit somewhere. I can't read the paper and say, oh, did Jahan pay this yet? It's not going to be on the paper, right? I have to call you. But in the smart contract, I can actually just send a web query to the contract.
So the contract actually has a life of its own. Like it will know certain things. It will have states of information related to conditions and stuff.
Absolutely. Interesting. And in there also, just as a real, it would have the rules of contract kind of written into it as well. Like if suddenly you say, no, actually I should change the terms of that contract. The contract will say, okay, yeah, I'll keep that as a proposal, but I need the other party's, you know, authorization for the amendment to kick in.
And in the real world, that would require what?
Well, let's say, you know,
for a dumb contract.
For a dumb contract, let's say, you know, we signed a contract, now I've got mine right here, and I say, no, actually, Jahan pays me 10,000, not 1,000. Yeah, that doesn't change the agreement, right? Whereas if you try to write that into a smart contract, like I said, it will actually consider that as a proposal and notify the other party whether he wants to agree to the new terms.
So it's like an issue of efficiency in a way, for updates and stuff.
Yeah.
Isn't it the same thing in real world? Because say if you have already got a contract, you want to amend the term, you still need the other party's consent before you could amend the term.
That's right.
Isn't it the same as what you do on the online?
The process, you know, of course, the process is actually the same. But the thing is, it's a physical process. You actually have to call the person or meet with them face to face. But
if you want to do it, you know, the amendment online, would you need to notify the other side that I'm changing it from 10,000 to 1,000? And so you still need to, you know, have the process of communicating to the other side about your proposed amendment. And then you have to wait, you know, for the other side to come back with the agreement. I mean, I would think that it really replicates what happened in real world. And I don't really see any efficiency in this kind of online amendment, isn't it?
Okay, the difference is that here it's. I mean, you can have the analogy of is a phone call more efficient than an email? You know, it's just those are kind of
well, it
yeah,
really
it's the same but different.
Form of communication. You know, you can do it in email or telephone, but it isn't. I mean, the principle is exactly the same as what you do in real world.
You can do with a smart contract. That's harder to do with a non-smart contract. Is that what happens is that it happens often in finance that somebody resells their contract by an option, somebody else resells the option. So what happens is that I want to amend the contract, but I don't know who.
But reselling the contract, you don't necessarily need the other person's.
But I guess what you're talking about is like in the case of like this, you know, futures contract where your counterparty is basically the exchange. It is not the other side who's really doing the you know, and you just notify the exchange, and the exchange would probably notify the counterparty. And if the counterparty agrees, of course, this so-called third party or the exchange, the trusted third party, is the one who will do the job. I suppose this is, and instead of, you know, calling and doing a negotiation with the other counterparty exactly, you just need to do it with this third party.
Well, the third party is the contract itself,
this
actually.
Type of contract will only be applicable in the case of like when you're doing it with like an exchange as your counterparty. Because in this case, there will be two contracts. One is myself as a party to the contract with my counterparty, but then I split it into two ways. Say I and the exchange with the other side. And so whatever I want to do, I just tell the exchange, and the exchange will inform the other side. And if the other side agrees, then of course the exchange will match the two instructions. And then that could be done that way. But what I'm talking about is in normally, like let's say a purchase of flats or sell, you go to buy some product, then you don't need a third party in between. You just deal directly with the other side.
I think in your case that's basically true. There's kind of some type of marginal efficiency kind of gained.
Yeah, but my analogy wasn't just a frivolous one of the telephone or the email, because the email is an asynchronous process. I send the email now, he'll answer when he has time, and as soon as he replies, the amendment goes into effect. Whereas with a phone call, maybe I call and he's not there, or I set up a meeting, he doesn't show up. You have all these inefficiencies in having to meet the person that you have in the synchronous methodology of communication that you don't have in the asynchronous method. Do you understand?
I think to build on that analogy, it's like your answering machine can't automatically decide to accept the new contract on terms that you priorly agreed to. For example, you might say, I think I actually agreed to the price that was a little bit too low. If he comes back to me with a new contract, which is a little bit higher, I'd be willing to accept that, right? But you can't program that into your messaging machine for your phone, right? But you could program it into a smart contract. Part of the point is that you're going to have the middleman either way. It's either going to be the answering machine for your phone, or it's going to be the smart contract. But a smart contract is just much more efficient at sort of executing your intentions, right? Since you can set it all up beforehand.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting example. See, what you'd have is you'd have a system, some sort of agent running locally, which would be probing the contract and would actually notice the amendment. And within your agent, you would have some rules that you give it authority. Yeah, I'm ready. I'm prepared to accept. I'll concede this much, and so on. That's a pretty good example. So I'll just move forward in the interest of time here. Okay, so rights. This is what Jahan alluded to before. It acts as a smart contract. So, like we were saying, instead of I guess the example that you gave about a hotel or something, or an apartment.
A rental property.
Yeah. I just gave the same example for a safety deposit box. So you could just do it with whatever. So that basically you can encode it inside this embedded system, any kind of electronic system, that is able to actually check. So it just follows a web URL and checks is yes or no. Is the person in good standing or not? If so, open the door, or else lock them out. Okay, custody. This is another new thing about a smart contract. A smart contract has its own credentials, so it's got a KPI key pair. So it has it can have its own wallet and it has its own signature. It has its own website. It's more or less like a person.
How can it be that unique? How does that work?
I'm not sure about how to answer that.
What is the format or the kind of of this unique address for the smart contract? How does that? What is it limited to, or
it's
not limited to?
It's virtually unlimited. It just depends on however they set it. Probably they use a GUID, which I don't know how many permutations there are, like billions and trillions or whatever. In a billion years, you'd never run out of permutations, as the theory says. But it just has its own unique identity that is basically just a series of digits. But yeah, to understand why it's unique, I can't tell you that.
Well, I'm not asking why it's unique. I guess I'm asking, let's say I do a dumb contract, right?
Sure.
So I'm going to file it with the whole government. It's going to have like some kind of ID number. And if the ID number is essentially relevant to the context of that government agency, right? So this smart contract, how does it have a unique identifier? In what context is it unique? Or like, how is it, what context does it exist in? Would it be from the context of an Ethereum standpoint, like the software system, or however you put it, like Ethereum versus Codius, or how does it become unique, I guess?
Well, okay, technically speaking, it's not so difficult to do. Every transaction in Bitcoin has its own transaction ID. So using the same analogy, I presume that's how Ethereum does it. I don't know that for a fact. That's my assumption.
But I don't understand this when you say that the SC has its own identity credentials. Are you treating it as a party to the contract, or are you saying, because my understanding of a contract is really the agreement of the terms of between two parties or parties to that contract. So basically, in paper form, it's agreement. In paper form, is digital. It could be agreement in digital form. But when you say it as its own identity, are you treating it as like a contract as a person, or
It's almost more like a generic address, you can say.
Well, actually, I think the question is actually there is an invisible third party in this contract, which is the executor, the servant, if you will. So the servant is actually a party in it. So he acts as a bailee, if you will. He acts as an executor. He acts in all those capacities. But
so if I want to do a contract with this smart contract, does that mean that I contract with this SC? Say I want to buy a flat, right?
Yeah.
So do I buy it from this SC, or do I buy it from Shelley, who owns the flat, who's intended to sell it to me? So how does that work? You are saying that, okay, my contract is still with Shelley, but then you put this SC in between. So I contract with SC, SC finds Shelley, and Shelley will contract with SC, SC buys it from Shelley and then sells it to me. Is that how it works? And that's why you have the smart contract as an individual or like a person.
I think the analogy is not so different than an exchange.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, this is the point that I'm trying to get at. So
Okay,
when you
yeah.
say that this smart contract, because I always have it, a piece of paper or digital form, exactly. This is an agreement, rather than you're talking about like an exchange. Yeah, well, that makes more sense then.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's basically the two of us. We have a contract, and we just appoint you as the person to make sure that everything happens correctly, right? So the contract is really the quid pro quo is happening between the two of us, but you're also you're essentially a party as well.
Yeah.
So that
and
that's
it happens to be like online or virtual. Right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the smart contract has obligations.
So it's almost
So
like an exchange, party.
you can make that analogy.
Yeah, this is what I'm thinking.
You could write an exchange with that. Actually, I'll show you.
Would it be considered trust in that situation?
Not necessarily.
No, I don't think that should be an interest.
It
A
can be a trust.
It can be.
It's a development platform. You can code all the rights and obligations you want. Just like I said, it's not equal to a contract. A smart contract is not necessarily a contract.
So say
You could make a smart contract into a trust.
I'm really thinking of more of like the derivative kind of trade.
Mhm.
So say the trade has to be done more on clearance. Say like like a swap, I can do it without involving on the exchange. So the two parties can do like ordinarily like the swap contract without any involvement with the smart contract. But if you want to do it in an exchange, then probably the exchange becomes your smart contract. So I do the contract with the exchange, and the exchange does the contract with my counterparty. And in fact, these are two separate contracts. That's what I'm saying. And no trust is involved, because basically your obligation owes to me, and I have obligation owed to you as well. The same way that you have another contract between Shelley and yourself as the exchange.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I don't have any issues with that. That matches my view as well.
And that is not one simple contract, there will be two contracts.
Yeah, basically two contracts. But
In
I
the
guess
real world, you identify two
what you're
contracts.
trying to do is that you create a platform so that it makes it easier for people to just automatic sort of execution and performance. Everything is standardized, and of course in that case all your terms might be standardized, unless you have some variation. Say if I want to vary my terms with Shelley, then what this ISTA agreement does at the same time, probably at the exchange, they will put in all these, like a confirmation or a schedule to record, the differences of the terms, which would vary from your main standard term.
Yeah, I'll make a comment that we got to move forward in the interest of time. The analogy that you're saying is actually quite correct in the real world. You have a contract with the exchange and the counterparty. In this case, though, technically speaking, you don't have a contract with the smart contract, because the smart contract is not a person. It doesn't have capacity to engage in contract. But the analogy works in almost every other respect. I'll leave it at that. If you don't.
It's not sentient.
No,
Yet.
not yet. Yeah. Okay, so here's an advanced example. When I first pitched this, you know, some people were just like, "Oh, don't tell this to anyone." And I thought, you know, I'll give it to you guys anyway. This is a decentralized exchange, which is more or less the holy grail of what we would want exchanges to be. So let's say you want to trade Bitcoin for Dogecoin. The way that exchanges work is that there's an order book that has all the limit orders in there. I'm ready to, you know, the last price was 100. I'd be ready to sell at 105. Another party would be ready to buy at 95. So you got this order book. Here, the order book could just simply be a bulletin board somewhere where there's links towards people that have pre-signed smart contracts that actually have custody of the one side of the trade. So here I could make I could deposit 1 Bitcoin and say, yeah, I'm ready to sell this at 400 right now. And so then the second party just goes in, signs the order, and drops the opposing crypto. And then as soon as that happens, boom, the execution goes. Now, historical data might be difficult, but then again, maybe you want this to be you know, dark in the sense that maybe you don't want this to be showing on the market.
Sealed with sealed.
Yeah, so I guess it'd be up to the smart contract or whoever maintains this decentralized exchange to impose them to report back to this historical database. But the advantages is that there'd be in normal exchanges now you have to create an account and then you have to deposit, you have to wire money into it, and then they hold an account on your behalf of both sides. Right? In this case, you wouldn't have that. The transactions would go directly to the counterparty. And the man in the middle, the smart contract, all it does is just basically just maintains the order book. That's about it. And there'd be, you know, there's this idea of trustless. There's no such thing as trustless in absolute terms, but requires less trust. You don't need to trust that the other party will, you know, won't perform or so on and so forth. But yeah, with this, since there's no pre-deposits, there'd be no more Mt. Goxes out there, and it'd be fully automated. The drawback so far, for now, is that it would only work with cryptocurrencies. Yeah, because you know, banks wouldn't play along as it stands. Any questions on this?
What is crypto?
Cryptocurrency, so just generally Bitcoin in general, Bitcoin and related types of blockchain-based coins. In a sense, it's it's programmable currency. That's kind of the big difference.
When you refer to fully automated, would you actually advocate for like a 24-hour exchange, or do you think that?
I mean, we already have 24-hour exchanges for Bitcoin. I'm not advocating anything. I'm just saying it's possible.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah.
Share is going, right?
Sorry, say again?
Is share X is going, right?
I'm not familiar enough with BitShares X, so I can't really comment intelligently on it. Okay, so this is just another example of a floating rate bond. So basically, you draft the contract. It could be it could come right off the shelf. You'd have these templates, and you just fill in the terms. The interesting thing here is that it'd be the smart contract would take custody of the Bitcoin. Yeah, actually the most interesting thing here is actually if you combine that with a multi-sig wallet. So let's say that the creditor says, okay, but I want you to have a multi-sig, change your wallet to a multi-sig.
Sorry, and what's a multi-sig wallet?
Okay, multi-sig wallet is essentially the same as a joint account. So, you know, you and your wife, you and your spouse, you get an account, you both can withdraw money out of it. That's what that is. So the biggest limitation, which I have to talk about, is in the crypto space now. There's no way to make a pull payment. Every time you make a payment, you literally have to click send. So you can only do push payments, not pull. So you can't schedule payments in the future. Can't do any kind of advanced kind of transactions like that. Not natively anyway. So this would allow it to do it. So let's say I borrow 100 Bitcoin and I pay. You'd make payments over time. Well, this would be a floating rate bond, so it would actually depend on, let's say, LIBOR or something. So it would check with the London Interbank Exchange and check the interest rate and set the payment accordingly. But the thing is, yeah, the important thing is that you could make it so it automatically withdraws from it, because the smart contract itself has its signature is configured on the debtor's wallet. So the smart contract can just pull out the payment automatically. Now, if there's insufficient funds at the time, the payment is not made, you can write it up in the contract. You can notify credit bureau. You could it could be a reputation system out there. And also, since this is a bond, maybe you want it tradable, maybe you don't want it tradable, so you enable or disallow transferability and so on. So this is just one example that you can play with this in in various different ways.
From a legal standpoint, so imagine that there's not enough money in the account, and you still go to arbitration and ask, go to court?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think that's my next point. So if you allow me to continue. Oh no, not yet. But I'll get to it. I'll get to it. Here's another interesting example. So you could essentially, a smart contract is not any different than any website. Everything that you could do with TCP/IP, for example, you could just do with a smart contract with cryptocurrencies. So you could just do a redirect. So let's say you create a smart contract. The only term in there is that anything it gets, it just sends to another wallet. So it's just more or less a repeater. Or you could look at it another way, that's a wallet alias. So you could change the destination and so on. Now, this is just an interesting example. I'm going to leave it up to people's imaginations, but I think this would make a lot of regulators go nuts. And try to ask a banker to do this. I think it'd be pretty hard to convince them. And the same thing as a splitter here. This could kind of represent the entity that's formed by a partnership, for example. So any invoice, you give them the address of the smart contract. They pay the smart contract, it's split in half. However, looking at this though, we can see those are not contracts in law. There's no back and forth here. This is only, if a judge would be looking at this, he'd be saying, well, this is nothing. This is not enforceable. And he'd be asking, like, what is the larger agreement, right? This is only part of something. This isn't a real contract. But this is just interesting examples of things that you could do. So they're much more flexible than paper contracts, if you will. Okay, the last point before we go to resolution. Offline clauses. Okay, so for the most part, there's a lot of clauses in a contract that are not obligations and they're not rights. They're just kind of setting the context and so on. Like setting the governing law or just a preamble, we intend to do business and so on and so forth. You can put that in there. Those are just comments, just like you would in any software. And these would be ignored by the executive. Oh yeah, and I mentioned ADR clause here. ADR means alternative dispute resolution. So you could say in there, like, yes, we agree to go to the arbitration center in the case of a dispute. You can put that out as an offline clause, or you could actually code that in there as well. You can draft the contract accordingly so that it will actually handle those things. So let's say that you put clauses in there to say that either party can raise a notice and say, yeah, I want to dispute this. You can write it any way you want. You could force it to freeze immediately. So it frees the contract in place, and you could pre-appoint an arbitrator, or one would be set up. If you pre-appoint the arbitrator, then the arbitrator's key would be recognized by the software, by the smart contract, right? And the arbitrator could go in there and says, yes, it's resolved. The parties are now okay, or no, it's not, and put in an amendment. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think the question is more. So if you go to court, right, the judge will have to understand the contract. That's right. And the contract is in code.
Ah, yes, yeah, that's right. I do talk a little bit about that as well. So if you can hold that thought just a little bit longer. Okay, so these are just initial legal issues with smart contracts. Now, of course, smart contracts don't necessarily exist yet. The technology will be out very soon. These are questions that nobody knows the answer yet. Whether working with smart contracts on the behalf of another is practicing law, is it legal advice? Nobody knows. Only the law and the bar society and the law society can figure that out. So yeah, these two go hand in hand. Can a smart contract or set thereof be considered a person? That's a funny one. Probably not to start, but maybe in the future as they get more sophisticated, you never know. And the last one is not a legal issue, but a political one. Should they be regulated? Should they be? That's for every person to decide, but I predict that they will be somewhere in the world. Some regulation somewhere will decide, no, we don't want this to be laissez-faire. Okay, so related technologies. Oh, wait. Oh, you know what? Yeah, in the interest of time, I had to delete a lot of slides, so I actually cut that out. Okay, so in the context, I'll talk about how resolutions will have to work. So, right. So the example that I gave about the code would actually have a placeholder in there so that someone could give notice. Hey, I'm doing this in dispute. That's an application platform, right? So maybe that clause is not there. Okay, so let's go back to the example between me and Jahan. Any one of us could go to the courthouse and say, hey, we have a dispute, and so on. And yeah, the court will take over, will take jurisdiction of it, and they'll proceed. So any of the parties could go to, I don't know about Ethereum, but Codius, they could go to the smart oracle and get a data dump of the contract. So they get the code, they get a record of all the transactions that happen, all the performance, all the events. And yeah, I don't know if the courthouses would be the court would be prepared to take the evidence, but presumably in the future there'd be at least some expert some legal expert who can kind of translate that for the judge. Does that answer?
Yeah, so I think the view is that at some point the court needs to have to wait on some code behind it. So because you could see the other way, which is because a smart contract, which is doing what it does, and then you could also have a dummy contract in addition, which is in element instead of just describing what the contract should be doing.
Yeah.
And you could have this as a bundle which you could go to the judge if you want to.
That's right. And actually, I want to take that a little bit further as well, is that every contract always has implied terms. And so, yeah, and the judge reading it, let's say he knows how to read code and he'd be reading it, he'd be still thinking like, hey, wait a second, this is an employment contract and he's paying him below minimum wage, right? So he'd be, okay, no, so, so there's always that kind of thing too. The actual contract is still not the smart contract in those cases. So yeah, that would always be. Okay, so now the actual technologies, like I was saying, if you insist, previous systems would be smart contracts. But the actual smart contracts that operate independently, like the ones that I was saying, Codius is supposed to be coming out in Q4. And
in a nutshell, what is Codius?
Okay, Codius is by the same guys that created Ripple. That's ripplelabs.com.
What is Ripple?
Okay, Ripple is another, technically I'm not sure it's a cryptocurrency, or at least it doesn't run on a blockchain like other cryptos. But it's always in the, it's always on the list of the top cryptocurrencies out there. So it has a pretty sizable market share, market capital. So yeah, Codius is by these same guys, but the oracle is actually the analogous of a courthouse, or the servant, if you will. The servant is open source software, and it can read any of the standardized languages. It's open source. Anybody can download it and create your own oracle. That's the difference. With Ethereum, there's one blockchain, and the blockchain handles everything. So it's not exactly the same thing. Without going into further technical details, I don't know how much clearer I can make it, but in the interest of time, I'll leave it at that.
Just what I say is code use, you need to trust your record to run the contract for you. Where in Ethereum, you're relying upon the trust you have on the blockchain to do that for you.
Okay.
Actually less trust involved in Ethereum.
Yeah,
So Codius is more trust, Ethereum is less trust. Got it.
Yeah, because you have to trust the one oracle that you decide to run it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I've been talking about this. I've been beating the same drum throughout, but this is just to underscore what is really new. Because, like I said, we had smart contracts before, but what is so new about this is you're merging the execution of the instructions and the agreement itself as it's written, as established, meaning as it is written, not what the real agreement is. And also independence of the contract. It's not interpreted and executed by only one of the parties. It's executed by a third party. And impose transparency on the terms of execution. So you actually literally have to go there and actually code it. But even that's not necessarily okay. Yeah. Now, here specifically in a paper contract, you can write something using very vague language without actually listing the specific instructions. Whereas here, you have to write the specific instructions that are unambiguous. If there's ambiguity, the system kicks it out. It can't process it.
Doesn't that then limit the type and scope of contracts that can be created?
Perhaps, yeah. If you have something, probably not. You could probably find a way around it. You might have to go around it a different way.
Maybe oracles.
Like, let's say you have something, let's say you have a clause in a contract, like if it pleases grandmother, then do this, and if it doesn't please grandma, then do that. That's a very vague thing, right? How do you determine? Of course, a computer program can never determine whether.
Smiling.
Yeah, that's right. Or you'd have to get into a little bit more details, but in this case, maybe you appoint a third party and say, like, Aunt May will actually visit grandma and ask her, and then Aunt May will come back and say, indicate yes or no, and then the computer, then the smart contract interpreter can move forward.
So as a general rule, smart contracts do have to impose like a whole lot more in terms of like spelling out contingencies, like all contingencies. But if in the case they can't or they don't want to, there are ways in and out of the digital, online, offline, to account for those.
Mm-hmm. You can also code the smart contract to just throw its hands up and say, okay, I'm done here. Just you guys handle it. You could do that as well.
Like an abort?
Yeah, you could do some sort of abort. It's just like, okay, yeah, I'm not ready for this situation, because you can code it. You can code it if you don't want it to keep executing. Like in the case of the decentralized exchange, let's say you don't want flash crashes to happen, and suddenly the bottom falls out of the order book, and you just say, like, okay, well, hit the panic button. I mean, you could have the smart contract actually behave that way if you want. Okay, these are just a generic list of applications that you could come up with. The thing is, this is a development platform. You write the rules you want. The only limitations is basically the data that you can get from the internet to hinge conditions on, and what you can perform on the internet. Like, for example, you can't make a wire transfer online right now with real money. That's not possible. The banks don't cooperate. But for everything else, it is possible. Okay, so I talked a bit about this, so I won't spend too long on it. Codius supports standard languages. Ethereum tweaks the languages a little bit. And there's a smaller list. Powered by gas. Gas is not. Gas is a subcurrency within the Ethereum system. I don't know what to call it, but it's basically the cost of processing is counted in gas units. Gas is just what they call it. It's not anything physical. It's not in gaseous form. and powered by the smart oracles. The smart oracles, whoever downloads the open source and establishes a smart oracle can determine its own fee schedule. So eventually you'll start seeing, a competitive market there. And here as well, you'll see a competitive market in the sense that whoever runs those nodes or whatever, I'm not sure what they're called, but
are there any other systems that can support smart contracts? You mentioned that some of the stuff can be done on the Bitcoin blockchain already.
Yeah, that's right. It's the non-Turing complete thing. Turing complete means you can do absolutely anything in code. The thing is that the Bitcoin, they made it as a design decision that they didn't want to support that because you could have infinite loops and you never know if the code will finish. So yeah, with these systems here, you could have those bugs in the contract, which could produce completely unintended consequences. So the biggest point is actually the last one. Codius is centralized, Ethereum is decentralized. I'll go into a bit more detail on that. So yeah, I'm just restating the same thing here. Yeah, I'm agreeing with you that there is less trust in Ethereum. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the last section, which is the DAOs and DACs and beyond. This part is semi-sci-fi. But it's theorized, and the Ethereum people talk about this a lot. In fact, I remember that Vitalik brought this up a few times in his last presentation. Okay, DAOs, DACs, decentralized autonomous organizations and corporations. So quickly define what those are. Those are organizations where the internal governance is automated by one or many smart contracts. So corporate governance, what it is, if I talk about just a regular corporation, well, you've got to sit down, you've got to have your board of directors meetings, and you've got to make motions and so on and so forth. This would be, the minutia of it is managed by the smart contract. And the performance of everything is managed by another set of smart contracts. So you have this complicated web of smart contracts that should behave the same way as a corporation. Still directed by directors. I remember that we had that discussion last time where it's like, and you asked the question, well, isn't this like the end of the world, the Skynet, or whatever? Not yet. Maybe in the future with better AI, but not as it stands. You still need directors to actually to approve the changes and so on, to actually establish it in the first place as well. Although you could code it so that it's completely self-reliant, but that remains to be seen. I don't think it exists yet.
So this is what you're saying is that these DAOs and DACs are essentially companies or corporations without people or with a minimum of people.
With a minimum of people, people are only sitting at the top making decisions. All of the work and all of the minutia of governing a corporation is done by smart contracts. So the other thing too is that you could register with the jurisdiction. This is one of those things that people say is like, oh, with that you can opt out of the system. You've got your own jurisdiction. Well, not necessarily. Like I said before, like the courts will assume jurisdiction if they know who you are and so on and so forth. But here you may elect to just put yourself in a jurisdiction. You can choose your jurisdiction that you want to put yourself into because you might want protection from the courts and so on. You might have a friendly regulatory environment and so on. So that's very separate. That's why I just wanted to make the point that jurisdiction doesn't come into play in terms of DAOs and DACs directly. It's not implied, it's not inferred or interesting.
But are these the same as these smart contracts? I mean, these DAOs and DACs.
I'm saying this is a group of smart contracts working together. Could behave as a corporation. So you could have like the smart contract inside a vending machine, for example. Let's say it's a real smart contract, not a light one. But you could have another smart contract that sits on top of that and that governs issuance of shares in that contract, for example. And people could put the directors could put motions. Oh, let's raise the price of Pepsi or Coke or whatever. And then if they all vote together, then they change the price and so on. Or well, let's add a new product in, or that kind of thing. But all of the minutia, all of the day-to-day operations would be automated. That's the idea.
Including payments.
Including payments, yeah, because the payments would be the same smart contract I described before. Okay, yeah, so actually, this is just spelling out a little bit more what I was saying. So it'd be governed by a set of smart contracts. So you could have articles of incorporations, partnership agreements, and so on, share certificates. Each one of those could be a smart contract. Motions are submitted to the board, you know, you have this voting process. You know. Ideally, you'd have it following the company's ordinance if you want to register it in Hong Kong, but, you know, or you follow your own process if you want to, you know, opt out of the system. Okay, so applications to DAOs, I talked about this. One thing is I made a prediction about a year ago that Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, you'd start seeing altcoins that were, because people were saying, you know, fiat as opposed to cryptocurrencies and so on. And I was saying, you know, I think somewhere, maybe a tax haven somewhere, will decide to make a cryptocurrency their real legal tender, and that's happened since then. So I'm just kind of looking ahead in the future. I think maybe perhaps in the future, and this could take 10 years, I don't know, but you might have these DAO templates that are jurisdiction specific, officially approved. Right now, all you have are these models, these model articles of incorporation, and it's still a big giant pain in the way to draft them and so on. But let's say you had that, then you could incorporate in a matter of seconds.
Which jurisdiction has issued this loan?
Sorry, what was the question?
Which jurisdiction has issued this loan cryptocurrency?
They're Ecuador. Ecuador hasn't, I don't think they have literally issued it yet. These are all proposals. There's a bunch of other ones that I think mostly failed. But Ecuador, I think, is the furthest along that road.
Shall we try to push through, and then we can go just directly to Q&A? What you got?
Yeah, I have. Well, I'll try to go really fast here. I only have 3 slides left.
Okay, so I talked a bit about jurisdiction, which is actually a very important concept. Jurisdiction is actually really one concept, but the word is used in 2 ways. When you use it as a noun in the sense of this is the Hong Kong jurisdiction and so on and so forth, or a judge will say, we have jurisdiction over this matter. It really means the power to adjudicate. And whether the state will assume control is generally in the case of, you know, if one of the parties is a resident or citizen. These are kind of the general rules. What I want to talk about is the last one here, whether there's a possibility for attachment. Attachment, I mean putting a lien on something, putting an injunction on something, freezing an account, seizing property. If there's a possibility to do that, sometimes the state will take jurisdiction. In the case of Bodog.com, that's, do you guys know that? Okay. It was one of the largest casinos, online casinos for a while. It was run by Canadian directors. The domain was registered by a Canadian registrant. Basically everything about it, it was physically hosted in Canada. However, the US came in and adjudicated. Did you know about this case? They adjudicated about it and convicted them guilty, and then submitted that to the ICANN, which struck out Bodog.com. So the domain was ripped out from under their feet. And the reason is because the US just assumes jurisdiction over .coms. You know, they can't do that for .hk or other top-level domains, but they do for .com. The reason is because there's a possibility for attachment. It violates all the other rules. There's nobody there. None of the parties were their residents or citizens. Well, actually, that's not exactly true. What happened here is that they had the reason why they went after Bodog, well, for one thing, it was the biggest one, but there was a lot of US citizens that were actually using the site to get around the local regulations. So they went extra jurisdictionally outside of their jurisdiction and imposed themselves on them. So this is kind of an example of what happens. Judgments can be found even when the party is not there, and that happens a lot in the IT world or in the virtual space. And that can happen. Actually, it happens also in the real world also. Another case I want to talk about is Roger Ver. You guys might know who he is, the Bitcoin Jesus. He was convicted for selling stuff on eBay that many other people were selling. I guess someone happened to buy it in a state where these were pest control substances, and I guess they were like miniature fireworks or something like that. So they were classified as explosives in one of the states, and then someone went and bought from him, and he was charged with. It was originally for 2 years, but he did 10 months or something. Just because he had a customer somewhere who bought from him. So it's not just when you're selling stuff online. It's not just you have to know who your counterparty is also. Even if both the parties identify themselves, and they're identified, and one of the counterparties happens to be in a jurisdiction was not the other party would be brought in and charged as well. That's kind of the point that I'm making. So here we can talk about pseudo-anonymity. Pseudo-anonymity is that your Bitcoin wallet is your identity, but nobody really knows what that string of numbers is. They may know, they may not know. It's up to you to really disclose it. For example, also the Silk Road case. Somehow they were able to seize Bitcoin. God knows how they were able to do that, but they did. And they were able to make a joinder between the Bitcoin addresses and the actual people. So they're able to arrest the people and find them. So what you end up with here is an arms race between the crypto anarchists who want to hide their identity and the white hat forensics type crowd. I think that's occupying full form.
Yeah.
No, the reason I was getting phone calls from my wife is that she's saying that things are just going crazy.
Okay. Well.
We can wrap it up soon.
Yeah.
We can stay here and take refuge.
Actually,
Trains did not stop at Admiralty, so I was asked to go the North Point way.
Okay, well, let's push through this. We'll do it.
Yeah, I only. Okay, possible effects of. I'm just going to finish this because it's quite funny because I think maybe people on the outside want to hear this. But yeah, with complete anonymity and privacy, theoretically, I mean, it just and this is one opinion. This is not the opinion of the legal system, obviously, but you'd have the effect of opting out of the system. In effect only is what I'm saying, but. Of course, the real world would look at it as, well, this is the black market, this is terrorism, you name it, insurgents, they call it whatever, or like the dark net that you have right now with the Silk Road type stuff. Because actually, and the point that I'm making here is that when there is no way to make an attachment, the legal system, this is kind of out of their reach in a sense. Of course, they'll keep trying. So again, it's that escalating arms race, like cat and mouse. So to take this even further, the last step, and this is what Vitalik talks about, is that if you push it even further, what is a government? Well, a government is a set of institutions. DAOs can emulate institutions. Okay, what if we take it to the nth degree and actually start building institutions that together form a government using smart contracts and so on? So we could create our own government. We could, of course, that'd be only in the virtual space, not grounded in the real world necessarily. So those are projects that exist. I mean, as far as I know, they haven't really amounted to much, but some people are working quite hard to try to make that happen.
How do you get the word futaki?
Huh? Oh, Futurkey.
Future.
Yeah, that's the name of. Those are two projects. Oh. You can find them online. I don't even know how to pronounce that. Futurkey. I'll just go on further. Okay, so yeah, to wrap this back full circle. Okay, this is my comment to them: is if they really want to be considered as a real country, you actually really have to have real sovereignty, because you need sovereignty. Sovereignty is what underpins a legal system, or autonomy, like in the case of Hong Kong. And you need some sort of protection or something, or some recognition, which the whole system right now would be geared towards not giving them any recognition or not protecting, most probably. Yeah. Because we'd be basically, they're asking the existing systems to give their power away to these virtual societies. But it would be theoretically possible if they win the security arms race. By security, yeah, the information security arms race. And it would bring into the effect of opting out of the real world. Anyway, I'm not going to comment any further on than that, but that's what some people are working towards. Okay, so that's it. That's
it. Great.
Yeah,
Let's give a big hand to Sam for his
Okay, so now it's the most interesting part. I actually wanted to start a dialogue if time allows, because there's a lot of possibilities here. Not just the kooky ones that I presented at the end, but even just before that. So, any comments, questions, concerns?
I want to start off with the first question, and this is kind of more about your personal experiences. So, being someone who's kind of a Bitcoin enthusiast, supporter, and at the same time literally a student of law, when you were going through this, when you think about smart contracts, what is your actual personal reaction? Is it one of like excitement and possibility, or is it one of just like trepidation and like how is this going to work? I mean, just what is your experience of it?
Yeah, it's trepidation. It's basically, I guess it's an idea that even as a kid, I thought, I think that's the future. That's where things ought to be. I kind of grew up in that kind of world where I always had that image and wondering why the hell it took so long. Why don't we have flying cars? Why don't we have this? That's one of those things. So I'm very excited. When I first learned about Ethereum, absolutely, I was very excited about the whole thing.
Questions? Comments?
Just want to clarify something. The smart contract basically can be centralized or decentralized, right? Is this the right way to say it?
It's not a checkbox on the actual smart contract. It's your choice of technology that you use. Kind of like, let's say, if you want to write something in Ruby as opposed to C++, right? Ruby is a scripting language. C++ is a compiled language. That same comparison applies between centralized or decentralized. It's in your choice of technology.
When I say centralized, I mean like maybe it's more like trust, and then decentralized definitely less trust. So basically, like a decentralized exchange, that's what you brought up. So if you just like example, you presented about
the decentralized exchange.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you don't really need like Mt. Gox to all the clearing.
That's right.
All you need is just like some deposits as a collateral, right? So
that's right.
So that is the smart contract. That's how I look at it.
Okay, what that is though, it's essentially creating a peer-to-peer system, is what that is. But when I say centralized, decentralized, it's actually where the contract physically is in custody. Whether the smart contract lives on the blockchain, which is decentralized,
decentralized,
or is held by a smart contract by a smart oracle, as in the Codius case. So it's embedded.
We're on the same page about the definition. Yeah.
Okay.
So you can go either way.
You can go either way. Yeah.
So I think that links to my always said the concern or questions about the illegal part of it. I think we kind of touched about this topic many times, but it seems like it's still not really too clear about.
I mean the partnership.
Yeah. No, I mean like negotiations and stuff like that. Especially when you talk about futures contracts and exchanges. So I mean, I'm from a futures exchange background, right? So anything happens, right? I mean, you can always, bring stuff to the court, and a futures exchange. I mean, a futures contract can have so many different factors into it, right? Especially the amounts of the delivery or whatever. It could be so different from just trading part.
Yeah, that's right.
So I mean, if it's like fully decentralized on the blockchain, let's say like you have a smart contract fully on the blockchain. I still don't see how this thing could be handled in the legal part.
But wouldn't it be that you just translate it into ordinary language from the code and then present it to the court?
That's not the issue, right? You're talking about a different issue. It's
It's
okay.
not issue. I think
It's not the interpretation of the contract, but
it's the party who's behind the contract, the builder of the contract, right?
the what?
The creator of the contract.
The
right?
creator?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's
Yeah,
that's not an attribute of a contract. It's two other parties, right? And the parties are listed in the contract. And the thing is, it doesn't really matter where the contract is stored. That's the thing about centralization, is where it's stored.
Okay, what I've been told happens in sort of real court disputes is that you have all these complicated derivative products, but what I've been told is that the actual sort of splitting up the cash flows, right? The actual algorithm for splitting up the money, that's almost never the subject of a court dispute. What the typical court dispute is that A sells B the derivative, it executes, B loses money, and then they claim that they were duped into buying the derivative, and so the contract shouldn't be executed. But in that case, what would happen in that situation is it would go to arbitration, and even though B is getting cash flows from A, then the arbitration would sort of order B to pay whatever money that they're getting back to A. That's the way these things work.
But what we're talking about is just, the circumstances surrounding
Right,
which the
because
contract was formed, right?
right.
And it really doesn't go into, well, probably also goes into terms of the contract.
Yeah, but the issue is that it's very, very, people that I've talked to say that it's almost never the case that a contract is disputed based on some ambiguity in the terms. It's usually, especially after the financial crisis, it's usually the ability to make the contract. It's what happens essentially is that somebody loses money and they say, well, this contract was never valid in the first place because I was fooled into signing the thing. I never actually got all the information necessary.
Yeah, and those legal issues still persist.
Yeah, those legal issues still persist.
That's the difficulty, I think, is because the case I was making earlier, which is you need to take the code to the judge to get it understood. The same thing we need to actually contract. So if we need to contract together, we need to agree on the code.
Yeah, that's right.
So we need to get to a point where we are familiar enough with the code that we can agree on. So if you look at contracts, usually there's 100 pages of documentation. What we're saying is it's going to be even more in code because you have to make sure you take into account all the possibilities, and so it's going to be quite
Tedious, yeah.
Yeah, tedious.
That's right.
And so how do you expect people, sort of regular people, to agree on smart contract without having sort of deep knowledge about Java or whatever the code is?
Okay, since it's code, you could have like includes or requires and things like that. You could have standard boilerplate stuff. That's generally, I think that's pretty much the
I'm
standard
also
case.
thinking about like legal language when you put in a contract. Sometimes you have these words subject to, provided that. So how are you going to put it in the code? And I think that at the end of the day, if you take it to court, this smart contract, the court will still interpret according to the normal sense of what this word means. So I really see it based on what was discussed. This is more an infrastructure thing. It could not really replace the contract itself. It's an infrastructure in the sense that it helps you, or like a platform, helps you to execute, or it helps you in storing and getting into a paperless form of contract and so on.
Well,
But it doesn't really sort of change your idea of what a contract is.
well, in my opinion, this entire presentation, we're not aiming to change the law, we're just changing the normativity we interact with the law. So the current normativity is to basically have everything by paper. However, the normativity is now changing into the digital environment. The rules are still kept the same, but we're just transgressing into a normativity where we use digital, where we use software to replace the tedious and cumbersome paper.
In finance, most of the contracts are already digital already. Because what you do is you have it's called the ISDA
The ISDA
agreement, right? So that's like 300. It's like 80 pages of contract, but it's the same contract that everybody signs. So the way that it works is that you and I sign the standard contract, which is the same. I mean, people have written entire books on this contract, so we know what we're signing. Once we sign the contract, then if you and I buy something, that's just literally one entry in sort of an entry in a spreadsheet, and that's considered an amendment to the contract. So you and I then buy and sell like 1 million derivatives back and forth, and each derivative is an amendment to this master contract that we have. And so the amendment is actually just an entry
Yeah, this is exactly what I said just now. Basically you've got standard terms, everything is standard terms, on that 80 pages, whatever. And then when you really do your contract, you sign a confirmation varying, the substantive terms like the price, the period, etc. And so that's done. And that is probably doable with this smart contract because everything are on standard terms. So you turn it into codes, turn the standard terms into codes. And then you just punch in all the important like price, time period, rate, etc. And then you've got the contract. And that's also the reason why very few people dispute on this contract because it's the standard terms and everybody will understand. And so very little issue will arise out of that particular term of the contract. But then you are really talking about an ordinary kind of contract like sale and purchase of goods, flat or a partnership. That could not be done over, at least now on that smart contract because it really involves a lot of contingencies, a lot of negotiation. You could not standardize it.
But for property, the thing is property, selling property, there's a statutory requirement that there needs to be certain formalities. This is written in the statute. So therefore, in order to have smart contracts in the sale of properties, we need to standardize them. We need to standardize them. We need to also get legislative authentication in order to make the system legitimate.
Yeah.
So this is something that we need to also get the government involved in.
One problem with properties. Okay, what happens with derivatives contract is that it turns out that all the derivatives contracts are either done in London or New York because they've already changed the laws to make these large contracts possible. So the issue with derivative agreements is that you and I could be both in Hong Kong, we could sign a derivatives agreement, but as long as we've got accounts in London or in New York, we can essentially jurisdiction shop to find something that's friendly. The problem with property is that if you've got a piece of property here in Hong Kong,
this property is subject to the land registration.
Yeah, then you're subject to Hong Kong law.
Well, in the case of sale and purchase of property in Hong Kong, there are really two stages. One is signing of the contract, and the other is signing of the deed or the assignment. And now we have been talking ages, like over 20 decades of coming up with a standard form contract. Never get doing it. Of course, if that is standardized, I could see that it could be probably put on the smart contract because all the terms are standardized, and there's really no room for negotiation, no room for dispute, etc. But when it comes to the actual completion part, the parties still need to sign the assignment. Right now, because of our deed system, the assignment is in various different forms. You cannot standardize the assignment. So at the end of the day, you still have to go through our normal legal completion process. And then in completion, you need to deliver the keys, you check the property, you need to, give back the balance of the purchase price. All this can have to be done by people. You could not be probably delegated to the machine to have it done.
Absolutely. However,
that's how I
with
see
contracts, you can take some of the more tedious and some of the more
bureaucratic
parts which can be automated.
Exactly.
And we basically take away the unnecessary and inefficient human interaction that there is. However, the critical parts like this, the signing of the deed, the checking of the property, hand over the keys. Yeah, you still need human interaction.
Exactly.
So it's really just shaving away the unnecessary.
Right. So
one thing that you will have to expect, and this is actually, I can talk more offline about the actual situation. You will find that in some situations people suggested doing essentially smart contracts, because you can actually do smart contracts without Bitcoin and derivatives. You'll find that what will actually happen in practice is that people will realize that they will lose their jobs as things become
that's another issue.
No,
that's political. That's political.
I know, but I actually have a competing opinion on that. Because I think you're actually, if we are to get into smart contracts, we are to use them, right? We're increasing the economy, we're increasing the pie, right? Because we're eliminating.
It's the creative destruction argument.
So you have if you want to do smart contracts, you can't do it within pre-existing organization.
You have to destroy the system.
You don't have to destroy your system. You have to create you have to leave a big company and start your own company.
But yeah, not necessarily. Like the internet didn't kill the phone. Right? We still have phones. But we have an alternative now. An alternative that's a lot more efficient.
Yeah, Yeah,
So
in fact, you
more
don't really
rights
need
have
to
no
do
cost.
this smart contract on cryptocurrency. You could do it, so long as you could identify a set of contracts which could be very standardized, no more negotiation. Once you punch it, there's a contract, like a vending machine. You don't really have any, other just discussion or variation. That's why you could do it over, the machine. But once you get into, terms which would have to be custom made, then no way. No, for the time being, I don't know what the future lies.
Yeah, but the example though about property, like I said, in 2009 or 2010, they had the first electronic only mortgage. End-to-end only electronic. So it is possible, just not in Hong Kong.
The mortgage form could also be done now because this is our standardized, contract designed by the banks. But each bank may have its own standard form of contract. But the bank itself could have an online contract for mortgage because it's exactly the same. Everybody comes in, get the money, on retail side, not on the corporate side, but the retail mortgage, that could be doable because if the bank, designs its own form and everything is put on this smart contract, they just ask the client to push the button and the money will go out. But of course, they still need the support of the solicitors, etc., in confirming that the property is okay, etc., etc. Right? And because we still have to do this title deed thing. But then as for the mortgage itself, and in terms of the documentation, that could be doable.
In the U.S., mortgages are standard because what happens is that the mortgages are resold through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and so they have a set of conforming mortgages. So the banks
are in the States. I mean, with this type of contract in the States.
Well, actually, you have. I mean, everything that he's talking about already actually exists, and I would argue that the Frankenstein that gets created once you have essentially smart or just they're called SPVs, special purpose vehicles. Once you have SPVs, then you have these autonomous cash flows that happen automatically, and these were a cause of the 2008 financial crisis because you had all these cash flows and all these sort of rules to say move these things to this thing, and you have computers that were putting. I mean, the financial crisis in 2008 would not have happened if you didn't have the ability for computers in the U.S. to literally just crank out mortgages, standardized mortgages, and so people were cranking up standardized mortgages with trillions of dollars. And the reason why I think this is useful is that the problem is not the creating of the contracts. The problem is that because the contracts were sort of paper, or at least the contracts were not standardized. You couldn't press a button and say, oh, this set of contracts causes $3 trillion to move this to this, or this set of contracts it contains property whose value is almost nothing. That's the exciting thing I see about that because it puts some transparency on the sort of quote-unquote smart contracts that already exist.
I'm hearing like a difference between what you guys are saying and what he's saying. Because
you hear a difference or no difference?
There's a difference. And the concepts, I don't think it's sort of translating in right. So I didn't know what a smart contract was before I came, but then it sort of clicked in like slide 15 or so, the benefits. And so when you're dealing with like this whole cryptocurrency and this whole crypto space, sometimes they use terms that don't really match up with what it is in real life, like mining. You can't really use an analogy of mining like a miner in Bitcoin with what the real life mining, the term of mining. So I think it's the same thing happening here with smart contracts. If you use all this legal terms, it doesn't really describe what the concept is exactly. I think a better way to describe it is, say I have a startup, or if I start a new company, and if I'm like a day trader or something, I wake up in the morning, I go to the computer, and I check the charts, and if the chart goes to this point, do a trade. If it goes down, sell, stuff like that. So every day I write down the steps I take, what I do every day. And so it sounds like this is basically, so say I start making money and I need to expand. So I need to hire someone, right? And I want them to do exactly what I want them to do, or what I've been doing. So I write the steps that I've been doing. give it to them, and then they execute it. So a smart contract sounds like it's like a contractor, and you just write down the contractor's terms, and then you put it on the blockchain.
I want to draw a distinction there. In your case, what you could do is just write a software agent that runs on your machine and follows. You wouldn't need a smart contract.
I guess
you need a smart contract when you're dealing with another person.
Yeah, when you deal with another person, so you give them your instructions, and then you put it on the blockchain. You say, okay, just hire someone. I just need a contractor, just run my daily routine. So in the analogy of, I'm just going through all the examples, you have like a example of dividing up revenue between different parties, right? When you get money coming in. So it's basically, you have a cashier, you write a contract, you write a job description. Whenever you get money from the cash machine, put it in this slot, put half in this slot, in that slot. That's a job description. And basically you just tell this other person, okay, do that. You can automate it without a machine on it. So it's basically a contractor. Just put a contractor on.
I think what you're saying is correct. I mean, there's a slide that Samuel has in here which is pretty to that point, which is a smart contract is not a contract in law. The whole point of this particular, I think, discussion was really to try and figure out, okay, smart contracts in the crypto sense of the word, which is a broader abstract concept which has to do with exactly the type of thing you're saying. It could just be like a contractor function, and it could be a contract in the sense that, well, not exactly a contract in terms of a legal term, but it can also span that. And that's what's kind of interesting to try and figure that out, because I think, or at least to talk about it and agree that there is no kind of firm definition about what a smart contract is. But I actually think it covers both of those things. But the point of today is to really look at it specifically from the legal side. Like, that's what we're actually here to do. We could probably have this exact same conversation, not from the legal side, and talk about all of the functional kind of contractor type of roles for smart contracts, which disregard the legal side of it and disregard the legal analogies. And it would be as kind of rich and as long of a discussion.
One of the issues that you come up with is that, I mean, again, the disconnect between technology and lawyers is that you have the same problem with the word digital signature. That a digital signature in technology means something completely different than signature. Actually, this is an interesting way, because once people came up with digital signatures, people realized there really wasn't a good definition for what a signature was in law. So people started thinking about that question. And I think this is one of the things that I think is interesting, is that you have this thing called a smart contract that isn't quite a legal contract, but it's not unconnected with a legal contract. What the relationship between smart contracts and legal contracts are.
Yeah, there's definitely a nomenclature issue here.
It's not obvious.
We're going to turn it back to Sam just to maybe give a final note, and then we'll, kind of let everyone go, because it looks like it's getting noisy out there.
So yeah, so the point of this talk was to bridge the technology and law. Law is something you go to law school, you spend many years studying, and same with technology. It's very complicated stuff. So I just wanted to actually put a bridge out there and hopefully bridge the gap so that technologists don't say foolish legal things and lawyers don't say foolish things about the technology. But to put in perspective, we've now seen 20 years of the internet. Nobody could have predicted the Facebooks and the Googles and the Yahoos. Right now, and we've seen 5 years of Bitcoin. And okay, Bitcoin is not there yet, but it's starting to pick up. Right? So right now, it's kind of like we're the 1993 of the internet, or the 2000 or the 2008 of the Bitcoin. So we're just looking forward. We're not sure yet where this is going to go, but all the possibilities are really darn exciting. That's the way I look at it. So, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sam, this is a pretty good, interesting presentation.